Why didn't anybody tell me? Hello and welcome back to Bookish, and welcome to a video in which I'm going to address the question, why don't men read? This has come up several times. There seems to be a lot of emphasis on gender in reading and on the fact that men don't read books, that something like 80% of readers in this country are women and only 20% are made up of men, or maybe that's just readers of fiction. And so I want to talk about that issue because as a man, I feel like I should be able to offer some kind of solution. Now, before I go any further, let me make sure that I make something clear. It is important that we emphasize and try to the importance of reading to young men and boys. It is important that we try to figure out how to keep young men reading as they move forward in life, so they continue to be readers their whole lives. That's important. I don't want to downplay that at all. But a lot of the discussion about why men don't read doesn't have anything to do really with teaching young boys the importance of reading and getting them to be lifelong readers. Instead, it's about why adult men don't seem to read. So one of the reasons I think for that is that education has increasingly, really, since the George W. Bush administration, even before that, going all the way back to the late 50s and 60s, has begun to emphasize STEM education over the humanities. Science, technology, engineering, and math. Those are the degrees, those are the classes that are emphasized in high schools, and those are the degrees we see most young men who graduate from high school and go on to college pursue a degree in and pursue jobs in or work in. And that's because we believe that those are the best jobs. Those are the jobs that pay the most money. Those are the jobs that offer the greatest chance for advancement and material wealth. And those things may be true, but in the process, I think what we've done in education is convince young men that the humanities are a waste of time, because after all, in our capitalist society, what we oftentimes tell people is if it's not something you can make money at, then it's not worth doing, that it's a waste of time. And so I think for a lot of young men, they become engaged in, told that they're supposed to be good at, science and math and those kinds of things, told that the liberal arts or the humanities are not things that men are interested in, those are women's subjects, and that becomes ingrained in them. And so when they grow up, they think that reading is in fact a waste of time. And I think that is in itself a real problem. But in addition to that, I think part of the problem we have with why men don't read is that men don't read books by women. That's really what we're talking about here, is that men don't read books by women. As a lot of these articles will point out, and as a lot of the, whiny men I've seen on YouTube talking about this issue will point out, that publishing right now seems to be dominated by women, both women who work in the field and who work in publishing houses, and by the number of books that are published. And this then is used as an excuse for why men don't read, because of course we can't expect men to read books by women. That would be utterly ridiculous. Not like we haven't expected women to read books by men throughout Western literary history. Not like we haven't expected members of minority groups to read books by people from the majority, white males, for all these years. It's only men that we seem to set aside and say, well, if men aren't going to write books, if men can't get their books published, then that explains why men don't read. And if publishers would just publish more books by men, more men would read. Well, this is just, utterly ridiculous, as I say frequently on this topic, because there's no reason why men can't read, shouldn't want to read books by women, other than society tells them that books by women are going to be all about feelings and romance and, women problems and things like that. And this just simply isn't true. Are those books out there? Do they exist? Certainly. The romance genre is, probably the biggest genre of fiction being published right now. That's certainly true. But there are also books, by the way, and just because books are about romance and about those things doesn't make them less valuable, doesn't make them not entertaining. I'm a man, I read them, I'm entertained when I read them from time to time. But in addition to that, there are books being written by women in all genres and all fields and all kinds of fiction that there's no reason why a man wouldn't read, except that there's a woman's name on the cover. And that is something I want to address today by giving men some suggestions about books they can read if they like a book by a male writer. So these are suggestions of books by women that I've kind of coordinated with 4 male writers who oftentimes come up as writers that men like to read. Okay, so I'm going to start off with the absolute most obvious. and that is Bret Easton Ellis. Bret Easton Ellis wrote American Psycho. American Psycho is still one of those books that dude bros like to read. It's still one of those books that a lot of men have read, even if I think they missed the satire and the point of it, that a lot of men have read. And I think the most obvious book I can give you, this is an example of a book by a woman that correlates to American Psycho, is My Sister the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite. This is a book set in Africa. It involves two sisters, and one of the sisters, as the title implies, this is no spoiler, is in fact a serial killer, and the other sister is having to deal with that. Just as Patrick Bateman is a narcissist with all kinds of weaknesses, who is vain, the sister who's a serial killer kind of matches that that description as well. So I think that's a fairly obvious choice. If you liked American Psycho, you should like My Sister the Serial Killer. Probably one of the top dude bro authors, or authors that a lot of men have read, or at least claim to have read, is David Foster Wallace, and I've read two of his books, Infinite Jest and The Broom of the System. Both books kind of involve these ideas that are just kind of, I think, on the edge of science fiction, that just exist on the edge of reality, that kind of hyper-focus on some issue or something, and kind of blow that out of proportion in all kinds of ways. And the author I would suggest, the woman author I would suggest, whose books I think you could transition from David Foster Wallace to these books, is that author is Jennifer Egan, and in particular her novels, A Visit from the Goon Squad and Look at Me. A Visit from the Goon Squad is, I think, like a much better, shorter kind of book in the same style as Infinite Jest. There's a large cast of characters. They are kind of loosely connected by involvement in media. In the case of The Visit from the Goon Squad, that media is music and its production. It's set like just a little bit in the future, in a world which is very similar, which we can recognize, and all these characters move in and out of the stories, and it's constructed in a really I think ingenious way. And I think if you're a reader of Infinite Jest, you should like A Visit from the Goon Squad, which is an excellent novel. As far as The Broom of the System is concerned, I would suggest Egan's novel Look at Me, which involves a group of characters from a small town in Illinois, I believe. The Broom of the System is set in Cleveland, Ohio, so not exactly the same, but both Midwest, and it really looks at that community and some of the characters there. There is a terrorist who is taken up resident there in a terrorist cell. There's a young woman who's a model who suffered an accident. There is a history professor who is questioning all kinds of things, and it kind of has that David Foster Wallace feel to it for me, and I think that would be, again, a good transition. So if you're a fan of David Foster Wallace and you are open to the idea of reading books by women, which you should be, I would suggest Jennifer Egan. The most difficult one of those four kind of authors that I see that a lot of men read and revere is Haruki Murakami. I've only read one Murakami book, and that's The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle. And I have to say that I liked it. I don't think it didn't cause me to want to read any more Murakami's books, even though there are lots of people I know and respect here who read and get a lot out of his books. It really didn't make me want to go on, but I did think there were things about it that were interesting. I thought the writing was kind of cool. I thought the blurring of the lines between reality and some kind of surreal situation were pretty cool. The kind of callback to World War II and things like that I thought were pretty cool. So I have two authors here that I think that if you're a fan of Murakami, you could read these two authors. You could read books by these two women and you would find some parallels there. The first, and I think the most obvious, is Louise Erdrich, who sets her books oftentimes on reservations, and they involve Indigenous Americans, and they oftentimes blur the line between what we think of as reality and kind of a spiritual or surrealist world. That's true for The Plague of Doves. It's true for The Sentence. It's true for La Rose. There are a lot of her books that's true about. And I think if you're a Murakami fan, you'll find that her writing also is excellent. And I think you'll find some parallels between the way in which they construct their stories, or the way in which that line is blurred, the way in which you have characters who are affected by something that's happened in the past, or affected by something that's happened perhaps even in the distant past, that are on some kind of a quest, on some kind of a journey, trying to figure something out. And so I would suggest Louise Erdrich. And then also a book I read several years ago, but I think works really well, and that is House on Endless Waters by Emuna Elon. This book I just thought was kind of parallels the Wind-Up Bird Chronicle, in the sense that we have a man who is trying to figure something out. In this case, he's trying to figure out something about himself and his past, and so we have World War II and events surrounding World War II connected to his life, him questioning his identity. There are characters who walk into the story in the past and in the present who kind of lead him in different directions, and there is a surreal quality oftentimes, I think, to some of those interactions. So I would suggest House on Endless Waters by Emuna Elon. And probably, the granddaddy of all the authors that, a lot of men seem to like and respect is Cormac McCarthy. With McCarthy, I think suggestions of books by women authors that you could transition to are a little more difficult, because I think, A, I've read more McCarthy, so I have more to say about Cormac McCarthy. And B, I think that his novels kind of come in at least 3 different styles. So the first book, McCarthy books, I want to give you a book by a woman I think can serve as a transition, is to compare or to suggest that the Border Trilogy, All the Pretty Horses, The Crossing, and Cities of the Plain, that those 3 books could be paralleled by The Lost Children Archive by Valeria Louiselli. All of the Border Trilogy books involve the border between the United States and Mexico, and the border represents kind of a line between chaos and perhaps civilization. It represents a place in which life seems to not be particularly valuable, and all kinds of violence happens. That happens in Louiselli's novel, as well as looking at these characters who are in a relationship and how that relationship falls apart. And if you think about the Border Trilogy, there are relationships in those novels as well, oftentimes relationships between 2 men who are friends and admires one another. And in Louiselli's book, it's a relationship between a man and a woman, a husband and a wife, and their kids. And there's also a really cool, I think, kind of conceit or construction in Lost Children Archive that works there as well. If you're a fan of McCarthy's Blood Meridian, his book set with the filibusterers, who go south of the border and cause all kinds of trouble and get involved in violence against people in Mexico and indigenous Americans, and it's an incredibly violent book set in this kind of really specific place that is desolate and yet beautiful, where we have morally ambiguous characters, where we're not sure what one of the characters represents, or whether they're good or bad or indifferent or whatever. I think that the books that would work as a parallel for that are written by women that you could transition to is the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemison. The first of those is the 5th season. It is set in a world where violence is common. Brutal violence takes place. There are characters who we're not sure what they represent. Are they good? Are they evil? Do they do bad? Are they doing bad for good purposes? Or are they just evil doing bad? And the world that's described is desolate. It's full of hostile people. It's full of dangers, much as the world of Blood Meridian. And the final book by McCarthy, I think I have an excellent parallel for, is The Road. So The Road is McCarthy's kind of post-apocalyptic look at a man and a son trying to survive in a world filled with dangers, where everything's falling apart, where even food is hard to come by, where there's constant danger and sickness and roving bands of all kinds of people who intend to do evil, and it's this really difficult journey that they're on, hoping to find some kind of safety, some kind of civilization moving forward. And the book I'd parallel for that, written by a woman, is Let Us Descend, which involves not a post-apocalyptic world, but an apocalyptic world. That is the world of slavery in the American South, and the violence that's done there to women and children, and it involves a long, harrowing, violence-filled, torturous journey across a great distance, and it kind of ends with the hope of someone finding freedom and safety. And so I would parallel Let Us Descend with McCarthy's Road. Anyway, there you go. There's some suggestions of books written by women for men who like to read books by the authors I mentioned. That would be Ellis, David Foster Wallace, Murakami, and McCarthy. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you have any other parallels that you'd like to suggest in the comments down below. And as always, thank you for watching.